put a pin in that because I want to ask about the legal barriers that usually surrounds that information. Danny, I'm going to get that from you in a moment. But first, Jacob, I want to ask you a little bit more about your reporting on this. Who normally has access to this system?
That's a great question. And I actually want to revisit something that Aaron just mentioned, which is about security clearance. That's a complete red herring from the White House. Security clearance is an irrelevant credential to access this information. What we're talking about here is need to have information for tax administration. Is this going to help somebody serve a taxpayer or a business or a nonprofit that interacts with the IRS? Is it going to help them maintain these systems? From an IT perspective, contractors frequently have access to this data. But again, it's on a need to know basis. The IRS commissioner does not have access to the system. The National Taxpayer Advocate, who is the internal consumer watchdog at IRS, does not have access to the system. Political appointees at the Treasury Department do not have access to the system. I mean, this is something that's in place for bureaucrats and for people who interact with taxpayers so they can serve taxpayers as they have questions for the IRS. This is
Jacob,
not...
That's a really good point. Why don't they have that? Why are they not normally allowed that access? Why would you keep the head of the IRS or any of the political appointees of the IRS away from that information?
They are not interacting face-to-face or over the phone with a taxpayer. That's what this system is for. This system is when I call the IRS because I have a question about my taxes, whoever's on the other side of the line pulls it up and can see my log of information, my bank information, for example. If I get a direct deposit from my refund, my previous payments year over year, or my previous balances or refunds, the business that I work for, the business that I run, all of these things that I'm sending to the IRS. So they have information about me, so they have my financial data, so I can do my taxes. A political appointee does not need that information. High-ranking officials don't need that information.
Are they worried that politics is going to get into this? That someone with a political...
Absolutely.
Yes. They're going to be targeting folks within this system?
Yes. I mean, that is concern that I had heard overnight from numerous people in and around IRS. The president in his first term, and Ashley reported on this when she was with us at the Washington Post, and we miss you, Ashley, reported about President Trump in the Oval Office musing to people about why can't we use the IRS to go after folks? Elon Musk has been tweeting about doing this day over day. That is an acute concern, the primary concern, that if this information got into the wrong hands of political appointees, it would be leveraged against Donald Trump's enemies.
Ashley, tell us more about that. You've done so much reporting on Donald Trump's motivations, the revenge that he desires. How might he want to use the IRS, and who might he want to target?
Well, first, as Jacob mentioned, and it's a great scoop by Jacob in the Washington Post, my former home, Donald Trump has mused in previous iterations in his first term about weaponizing all manner of government agencies, but including specifically the IRS. Katie, as you and I know, he talked to his former chief of staff, John Kelly, about using the IRS to go after his political enemies. And then it was reported later, and there was no way to definitively prove that this was just not the random unluck of the draw, as it were, but that the IRS did this incredibly sort of deep dive, kind of known as a dead man's audit of James Comey and Andrew McCabe, both of them who were very clearly Donald Trump's enemies, who Donald Trump had expressed a desire to go after. They both get chosen allegedly at random for this incredibly invasive audit. The odds of that happening are sort of astronomically slim. And another reason, there's so many reasons why this is so alarming to so many people. But another reason, of course, is you have had Elon Musk standing in the Oval Office and musing, hey, we're looking at lawmakers who seem to be living too lavish of a lifestyle, right? Which is something that if the situation were reversed and Democrats were saying, you know, you have a public salary, but your house seems awfully nice. You know, are you just a good investor in the stock market, or are you performing fraud, would be instantly denounced on privacy grounds, on anti-capitalist grounds from libertarians, from Republicans. So you have DOJ saying quite overtly, we want to look into people who we believe might have more money than we have arbitrarily decided they deserve. That's alarming. And you have a DOJ that is serving a president who has made quite clear and has begun to do so that he would like to use every power of his presidency to go after his political enemies in a manner of public retribution. This latest reporting from the Post is deeply alarming.
I know it's a holiday, Ashley, but has there been any expression of alarm or distaste even from any lawmakers that don't have a D in front of their name?
So to be fair, Holiday, I have not done a full survey of all Republican lawmakers, but what we've seen in these first few weeks is that there is very little willingness to push back on Donald Trump, and not just push back, but sort of that lawmakers, especially Republicans, are in fact far from pushing back. They're actually abdicating the powers with which they are vested, the powers, for instance, of the purse strings, the powers of appropriation. And in some of these federal funding freezes, what you are seeing even then, when what Donald Trump is doing is negatively affecting a senator's state or a lawmaker's district, they're still not pushing back on the president. They're saying, I still absolutely agree with what he's doing, but hey, by the way, can NIH in my state keep its funding?
Danny, is it legal to target somebody at the IRS, with the IRS?
Well, the way it normally works is the IRS uses algorithms and computers to first flag someone, and then from there the human factor comes in, and they review the records to make sure whether or not an audit is required. In theory, one person acting alone cannot single-handedly direct an audit.
They can't just like Google somebody's name within the system or just search someone's name within the system and say, I wonder what Danny Savalos has in his bank accounts. I wonder what Danny Savalos sent last year to the IRS.
Right.
Not to target you specifically with this, but searching out a name.
But no, exactly right. I mean, the system is designed so that computer algorithms together with human accountability prevent the situation, in theory, that you're describing. But since so much of what the IRS does is shielded, especially the investigatory part of it, since so much of that is something that isn't really public, it leaves us wondering what exactly goes into it. And could a directive from the White House possibly influence that decision? It shouldn't, but who's to say it won't?
But if, say, you are finding yourself under an audit, surprisingly, or your information, someone screen grabs it, your information gets exposed, your home address or your savings account information or your salary or whatever, what is the recourse for that person? Does an American citizen have a recourse against the federal government?
Yeah, well, Jacob described a lot of the legal aspect very well. And basically, not even everyone within the IRS has access to the IDRS system, this sensitive information. And it's a violation of federal law to even browse it or access it without that permission. That could, in theory, go for a tax commissioner who, as Jacob pointed out, does not automatically have access to this sensitive information. So federal law protects and outlaws accessing this information without authority. The question is, to what degree and how fast can members of DOJ or someone else that the White House appoints or gets in there be granted that authority, be one of the people that is ordinarily allowed to access this information?